morning. Welcome to the Science and Industry Partnerships in the Caribbean session. The title is actually Science and Industry Partnerships in the Caribbean, Desirable, Doable, or Just a Dream. We're going to have we have a fairly distinguished panel here this morning that is going to they've been asked to make a 10-minute presentation each, and that leaves us sufficient time, I think, to have a robust discussion afterwards. Hopefully some of the things we're going to hear about are ways that we can improve or enhance the ability for our university in particular, and our industries to work better together. But let's see what I have to say. We have Mrs. Carol Andrade from SEPROD, Mr. Bruce Golding, almost needs no introduction actually. He's currently an honorary distinguished fellow at UWI. Professor Robert Sim from the Department of Pharmacology, University of Oxford. Mr. Norman Wright at the very end. He's a managing director of from Perishables Jamaica. And Mr. Henry Mooney from he's a country economist from Inter-American Development Bank. So let's begin by giving them a warm welcome. And we're going to begin with the presentation from Mrs. Andrade.
Morning, everybody. Faculty members, students, ladies and gentlemen, can't hear me? Okay, all right. Okay, so I'll start again. Good morning. Distinguished guests, colleagues at the head table and in the audience, faculty members, students, ladies and gentlemen. I am Carol Andrade. I currently work at SEPROD. And for those of you who don't know, SEPROD Limited is the largest this way. So SEPROD group of companies is a 20 billion company, $20 billion Jamaican company with over 2,000 employees. It started in Jamaica in 1940. It is currently the largest manufacturing food company in Jamaica. And our vision is to provide top quality, nutritious food products to nations across the globe. SEPROD means, actually it's an acronym. SEPROD stands for soap and edible products. Most persons don't know that, but as we evolve, we have dropped off the soap, but we have still kept the S. So we still have SEPROD. And so our biggest product is edible oils and fats. We have a full range of dairy products as well as fruit and milk-based beverages. We have corn and wheat-based products, our newest addition. We have sugar, and we also have sweet and savory biscuits. These are our brands that are now present in the Jamaican and Jamaican internationally. Actually, we export to United States, Canada, Belgium, and the UK. Of course, Caribbean is also included. Okay, so my role here today is to say whether or not science and industry in the Caribbean is it doable? Is it just a dream? And so I'll start. Okay, so what exactly is a science and industry partnership? It is engagement and the utilization of the intellect of young scientists. So in other words, let me just break it down. What it is basically, if you ask me, persons in academia, that is tertiary institutions, who come up with innovative ideas that a company would want to sell. And these would be seen as the next breakthrough innovative idea. So both the scientists and the industry would benefit from these ideas. This breakthrough within the Caribbean would include science-related fields such as food products, medicinal products, technology, engineering, instrumentation. These partnerships, however, would need business guidance or contractual engagements, and therefore other faculties such as business management and law would also have to be involved. Scientists and industry leaders tend to see things differently, and I see this a lot when persons or scientists come to us to propose an idea that they want us to buy. Scientists are always eager and excited about this next breakthrough. So I have this idea and it's just great, you just have to buy it. But leaders are a little bit more on the, they aim to keep the break, they don't see it as something that they want the entire world to know, as the scientists do. For them, they see it as something that they want to keep for themselves and maximize the profits for themselves. So consequently, selecting the right team for each partnership is very important. How can science and industry partnerships be successful? Science and industry partners should agree and have clear and shared purposes, objectives, and guidelines. They should clearly identify who owns and has the right of the resulting intellectual property. And the big one for me, if nothing else comes off, is that we need to select teams of leaders, the team leaders who understand and are knowledgeable of both business and academia. What we find a lot is that most times when, I'm going to say UA is trying to sell us an idea, it's a scientist who comes to sell us that idea. Sorry, I am a scientist, but I don't think it is the scientist has that skill. Normally you want somebody else with a better skill to come and sell your idea. So you convince that person comes and sell it. All right? There should be an ease of communication between both parties. So you need to break down that barrier. We need to also sustain a long-term relationship. So when we come to engage a SEPROD, for argument's sake, in something, don't come and say, okay, I have this idea, I'm going to sell you today. What is it that we have that we can work over long term? Because with that, it gives us time to know each other, it gives us time to build a relationship, and eventually mutual trust will begin. So, desirable, doable, dream. I'm not going to look at dream because I think we've passed that. I'm going to focus on the two, desirable and doable. It's a necessary course of action that is needed, and we have the power here in the Caribbean to get it done. So what is needed? We need science, we need industry, we need resources, and I tag on to the bottom, government policies. So do we have tertiary institutions in the Caribbean? Of course we do. We have it right throughout. We have the biggest one being University of the West Indies. But we also have University of Technology in Jamaica. We have University of Trinidad. We have private and other public colleges and community colleges. We have them right throughout the Caribbean, actually. Do we have industries? And this is just a handful of what are different industries we have. Agro-processing under with SEPROD Falls. We have metal, we have construction, we have printing. So we have both the industries and we have tertiary institutions. But when we look at the resources that are needed, and I did not include, I specifically left out the industries because to me, I think I'm going to focus here on what is it that academia needs to do. So the scientists are there performing their research in the labs or in schools. So they're there already, so we have them. But do we tend to utilize non-scientists from other faculties of law, business management, who can give us clear and shared purposes and objectives and guide us as to how to create an intellectual property? Do we engage business management, academia from business management, to ensure that partnerships run like a business? So you don't come today and we don't have a business that starts today, or we have a project that starts today, and next week somebody has to be calling, where are we on this, what is happening? It is run like a business. Somebody monitors it, they look at it, they see what is going on, they see, and at all times they can give out, this is where we are, this is what we need to do, etc. We could utilize academia from communications to assist with bridging the gap on the communication gap between scientists as well as the industry. Utilizing marketing to sell what we have. You're doing a lot of development, but who is marketing it for you? We can engage human resources so that when we go to select a team, and I'm going to use the word team here, because when we go to select a team, who do we want on that team? Is it all scientists? You should reconsider that one. When it comes down to infrastructure, I mean, both parties can decide on where we want. Do you want to work in do you want to work in the tertiary institution? Do you want to come into the industry? Both need to be agreed on that from the contract. Technology. If it's a situation where technology is needed for this particular contract and we don't have it at where we are at, use up what we have across the Caribbean. We have different institutions across the Caribbean. Probably we don't have it, but somebody else has it. So reach out. Get them to come in. Get them to be a part of this. Create that from the beginning so they know that, yes, this is where we are going and we're serious about it. Government policy is another big one that I think we can really do with right now. And some of the things I'm thinking of, create tax incentives for industry. So if we are willing to partner with tertiary institutions, give us a break on some tax incentives that can help us to, want to come back. Or they can fund public universities by creating performance-based funding, saying that, like what is happening in UK, Canada, Singapore, meaning that, okay, fine, so you are going to offer universities supplementary earmark funding for research condition on the university achieving a certain level of contracts with the industries, right? Creating a university research park, and unfortunately or fortunately for us, this is something that I think is new, that currently the PSOJ is working on now in Jamaica. We're trying to create a university research park for us. Introducing regulations to allow universities to file for patents. This is a new idea, but it's something that we really need to look into to see if it can work. And something which, during the research for this presentation that got me was that since the 1990s, universities now have a third mission, as they call it. So no longer are tertiary universities just a teaching and a research entity, but they're now being asked to address the needs of industry and to contribute directly to economic growth and development. Now, for me, I graduated UA in the 1990s, and when I left, I didn't have this. So I'm saying, where are we? So we seem to be far behind, all right? Universities act as an important driver of economic development, and catching up through their role in education and technology absorption, adaptation, and diffusion is crucial. Okay, so in concluding, since I have less than a minute left, science and industry partnership is doable in our economic future, and our economic future will benefit from SIM if it is done properly. To make it happen, it will not depend on just the scientists working alone, scientists from academia working alone, but they have to get other persons from academia to be a part of the team. Government intervention could also assist. And the FST here has some projects going with industries, but there's so much more that can be done. And I think it's now time to make this a reality. We need to catch up with what is happening in the real world. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Andrade. Mr. Golding, please.
That's good. Good morning, everyone. I feel like an oddity in this gathering. When I was at school, I found science subjects to be an insurmountable obstacle. So I ended up studying economics and history. And here on this campus, I studied economics and government. And I'm going to begin my few remarks this morning in a rather strange way. The Bible tells us that when the Gibeonites tricked Joshua into believing that they were not Canaanites, but they were in fact neighbors, and he discovered that he had been deceived, punish them and determined that they would be hewers of wood and drawers of water. And that reflects so much of our own experience in Jamaica over many, many decades, running into even centuries. We still export raw bauxite. We still struggle to ship out raw sugar and allow other people to make far better use of it. It is said that we produce the best chocolate in the world in terms of its flavor. But Belgium, which does not have one cocoa tree, is the world's premium producer of chocolate. We have lagged behind for a long time. And part of that is that we just have not appreciated enough and embraced the importance to development of the application of technology. In a sense, we could be forgiven in the past because technology was not readily accessible. But technology itself has made technology so easily available now. The mobility of technology is awesome. And the challenge that we have as a country is how do we get our hands around it? How do we identify the technology that could make sense and make difference in terms of our outcomes? How do we incorporate it? How do we adapt it where it has to be adapted? How do we put it to work? There is a huge chasm between the centers where technology needs to be developed and conditioned and made implementation ready. And I'm talking about places like the university because I know of no country in the world that is advanced that has not been driven by the innovation and the technology that comes out of its universities. That's where this thing is all about. And without being critical, the University of the West Indies over many, many years has done a lot of work. Much of its focus, certainly when I was here, and that's a long time ago, but much of its work was in doing research, making discoveries for the purpose of producing graduates, and we have produced countless numbers of PhDs out of that. And for a long time, having done that, we simply closed the file and put it somewhere and we embarked on something new. I was amazed when I rejoined the university a few years ago to discover the wealth of knowledge that resides here, but we treat it as if it is some artifact that, we don't want breeze to get near it and we don't want sunlight to shine on it because it may damage it. And we hide it from the rest of the world, hide it from ourselves. There's a big chasm between what goes on here and what the university here is capable of doing, a big chasm between that and Ms. Andrade's efforts at SEPROD. Because she has responsibilities to her shareholders. They're not in this thing for some academic purpose. They're in this thing because it's a business. They want to make money. And there's no inconsistency between the work that the university does and the making of money that SEPROD has to be focused on. But it's almost as if they walk on different sides of the street. And part of our challenge is how do we get them to a meeting place? How do we ensure that the work of the university, without abandoning its academic obligation in terms of the pursuit of knowledge and discovery, But how do we synchronize that with the real world out there, the SEPRODs of this world, who have to transform that technology into customer satisfaction? Not only is it not impossible, it's not difficult. I believe the university has to take a new approach. The deep sense of proprietorship that is almost synonymous with researchers has to give way. The university, of course, has to be rewarded. As a matter of fact, I have long seen, as the dean knows because I've expressed these views before, I believe that this faculty could be a significant economic center for the university in terms of bringing in resources. Resources not only to fund and advance the research activities, but resources to expand the breadth of the offerings and the activities of the university. It requires a new mindset. I believe that the Vice Chancellor has that sort of mindset. But there is a culture. How many more minutes do I have? Just need about 2 more. Because I know I'm sort of departing from the focus on science. There's a cultural problem that has to be addressed at the university. I come from deep out of the politics of Jamaica. That's where I spent my life. I thought that was difficult to maneuver through. The politics of this university is something even greater than that. And there's a cultural change that has to... I hate to say this, but this effort that we're all involved in today shouldn't be just a faculty effort. The whole university should have been involved in this. Because there's other faculties in the university that impact on the work that we're doing here. And I get a sense in terms of my own interaction with the university community that I'm dealing with several different kingdoms. And each has its own king. And each king has his own idiosyncrasies, and you have to get accustomed to how to deal with that. So there's a lot of work that has to be done that is not science and technology. As far as I'm concerned, it's just plain common sense. The potential that this university has is far from being actualized. And I believe that this faculty, perhaps more than any other, has the potential to be the game changer. There's a tremendous lot of good work that is being done here. What we need to do is to create a framework in which that work will not only produce outstanding scholars with lots of PhDs, but we can transform it in a way that it now can make a difference to the life of my helper who is struggling to send her 3 children to school. It is something that can be done, and I will continue to be annoying in terms of trying to focus our attention in that new dimension. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Golding. So far we've had some very useful insights from both speakers, and I hope some of you are percolating questions, because as soon as all the speakers are finished, we're going to open up the floor for discussion. There's already a lot to talk about. But before we get into that, let me get Professor Sim. Are you... But certainly so far what we've seen is that question that's asked, whether it's doable, desirable, or just a dream, thankfully everybody so far seems to be, not only is it desirable, but it's also doable. So 2 out of 5 so far. Let's see how it works out. Are you ready?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's the first time my wife, Professor Edith Sim, and I have been to Jamaica, and I must say I thank you all very much for the warmth of your welcome. And I must say we have enjoyed enormously our visit to this very beautiful and welcoming country. So my viewpoint on the point of discussion is somewhat different from some of the other speakers. I'm basically a researcher. I worked for many years for the Medical Research Council in Oxford, and my main interest then is in research. But I'd like to make some observations on commercial opportunities in my life sciences research. So to explain a little bit about what I worked on, because the remarks I make, of course, are relevant only to a particular area of research endeavor. That is, I'm a biochemist and immunologist, and so the indications I make about the discussion I make about what commercial opportunities we have are very much restricted to by field. But basically, I worked on what was called the complement system. I was to study the structure and function of proteins of this system, which is a big part of the innate immune system. And the complement system is very complex. It's about 45 soluble and cell-bound proteins in the blood, and it recognizes almost anything foreign, including microorganisms and dying cells and so forth. And its job is to try to help to get rid of these. So basically, this is the sort of thing that the complement system does. It will attach itself to microorganisms like these yeast cells, and it will signal to receptors on macrophages to help to take these up, swallow them, engulf them, and destroy them. So while I was doing this basic research, we discovered or made many new things. Of course, all researchers in their research, they discover and make many new things. And whenever you discover or make something new, there is always a possibility that someone might buy it. But as our first speaker emphasized, you really need a champion to push forward the commercial aspect. Because most researchers, they're involved with day-to-day small problems. They like to get a structure, they like to get a mechanism. They're not really interested, they're not really trained to communicate and to take a very strong interest in potential applications. So it's very good to have a champion, someone with a little bit of a different mindset to try to help you to commercialize these things. So we had many opportunities to participate in commercial development, and these included drug development. Okay, thank you. Drug development, diagnosis, and instrument design. So, as regards the drug development, I'll give a couple of examples. The first one was a protein hormone called amylin. We studied amyloids because they activate the complement system. Amyloids are protein deposits which form in tissues in various diseases, including diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, mad cow disease, for example, and they're generally made up of a particular type of protein. So in this case, we worked out the structure of the amyloid from diabetes patients, and this turned out to be made up of a small protein hormone called amylin. And amylin helps, was later found out, to control the sugar levels, the fine control of sugar level in diabetics. In this particular research, it was somewhat unusual because the research leader, Dr. Garth Cooper, was himself the champion. He was a Maori from New Zealand. Maoris have a high incidence of diabetes, and his aim in life was to cure diabetes. So he himself pushed forward to patent the structure and activity, and he got financial backing in the USA to found the Amylin Pharmaceutical Company in 1987. Now, the company worked on peptide derivatives of amylin and developed several drugs, for example, pramlintide, which was approved by the FDA, and the company was bought by Bristol Myers Squibb for $5.3 billion in 2012. So this was great for us. We were looking to increase the amount of research money that we had, and so we got a share of this money. Not a very large share, but nevertheless a very useful one. The other protein drug that we were involved with was a drug which was derived from ticks. So tick saliva, when ticks bite you, they inject into you some molecules which inhibit blood clotting and the complement system. Another Oxford lab had identified protein from tick salivas which inhibited complement, and it's being now developed by another therapeutic company, and it potentially has very valuable market in kidney disorders. This one here is atypical hemolytic uremic syndrome, a kidney disorder, and some other inflammatory diseases. This is a picture of the type of research which these people did. This was, in fact, this is a tick biting you. And in order to do this initial research, the researchers had to get a container full of ticks, stick their arm in it, let the ticks bite them. Then they snipped off the head and purified from the head these salivary proteins. So you can imagine it took quite a long time. The other thing, another aspect we were involved in was diagnostics. We won a European Union grant to develop an easier way to identify people, patients, who have deficiencies in the complement system. And we developed an assay suitable for use in hospital labs. And then a commercial company called ViesLab was a partner in this grant, and they had the technology to make a kit, which was a type of assay called an ELISA, which was suitable for sale. This particular group shows the champion is this gentleman here, Jürgen Wieslander. He was the one who had the marketing and application skills, and his technical officer, who is at the back, Ingves Sommerin, was the person who knew how to adapt the kit from laboratory use, research laboratory use, into something suitable for a hospital laboratory. ViesLab was taken over by a bigger company which sells about 250,000 euros worth of this kit every year since 2008. So we get some royalty from this for research money. Another type of development we had was instrument development. So as part of our work in the early 1990s, before genomics became so large, we needed to separate very big segments of DNA. And a PhD student from Germany, Konrad Kolbel, designed an electrophoresis instrument to do this. This design was sold to a company called Stratogene in California. It was a company which specializes in molecular biology equipment. And the instrument was manufactured and sold by Stratogene for about 4 years, and then its inventor about £90,000 in royalties. That's allowed him to pay his PhD student fees and lead an extravagant lifestyle for a short time. This was the publication which resulted in that. The technical description is a simultaneous tangential rectangular inversion de cassette electrophoresis. It's quite a short-lived technology. And in fact, that was why it was on sale for only 4 years. So in terms of comparisons, the drug design and development projects, of course, are very long. They're more than 20 years from the first discovery to the commercial value. The diagnostic projects, of course, are much easier, cheaper to develop. It's about 4 years or less to make a commercial assay kit, but then it may be a little longer to develop sales. The instrument design may also be quite rapid, 2 years for the design, but like the diagnostics, instrument design is particularly vulnerable to being replaced by new technology, so you don't really know the lifetime of the value. I should point out we often raise some extra research money by selling reagents, doing contract research for companies like Amersham and GE Healthcare, Celtech, Binding Site and Serotech. These are antibody sales companies and others. There's lots of opportunities for this, but we didn't really spend a great deal of effort on it. However, among the commercial possibilities, this is one of the easiest. We also had funding for PhD students from some of the bigger pharmaceutical companies like Glaxo and Celtech, which was formerly a British company. but we never succeeded in getting them to give us bigger grants because their attention span for a big pharmaceutical is too short for academics. For if we want 3-year PhD student funding, for example, generally their working plans, their decisions on targets and so forth, they work only in a 1-year cycle. So by the time a PhD has finished in 3 years, they have lost interest already 2 years ago. What would help to make this easier? My experience in the UK, of course, you need intellectual property specialists to facilitate patenting and licensing. So you need someone with the connections with industry, the legal framework in their head to help you with patenting and licensing. You need, it's desirable to have agents or middlemen to sell reagents or skills. This is another group of people really not necessarily with the legal background, but people who are good salespersons, people who could, for example, sell you a second-hand car even if you didn't want one. These are a number of people of that with those skills are very active in the scientific field. It's desirable to have a cheap incubator lab and office space to help develop towards a commercial product. And of course you need, it's very desired to have venture capitalists, a friendly multi-millionaire. And also you need an encouraging administrative and legal environment provided by your employer. Because of course when you are making your research discoveries, it is their money that is paying for you, and any grants that you're awarded, it is their money also that is paying. So there must be an equitable agreement which would give you something to encourage you, but also would give them their appropriate share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Sim. Some very useful insight for those of you who may not understand what that scientific process behind those products are. But plenty more to talk about. I now invite Mr. Norman Wright. Mr. Norman Wright.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen all. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some thoughts with you this morning. Can I get some light this side? No, I see. Okay. Okay. The premise from which I'm working this morning is one where science and industry partnerships are essential to boosting economic activity through innovation and applied science. As the managing director of Perishables Jamaica Limited, I have witnessed firsthand how important these partnerships are for national development. Perishables Jamaica Limited is a small manufacturing operation that utilizes indigenous agricultural products, medicinal herbs and spices to make herbal teas, some of which you probably have enjoyed in the last 2 days or so, and if you haven't, please do so before the conference is over. Thanks for the commercial. I didn't say it's under the Tops and Sipper Copper brands, but permit me to say so. Having established that, we recognize that the importance of our farmers, our stakeholders, are critical to the ongoing development of our company. I will outline a couple of examples of which I think we could benefit. We as a company utilize Jamaican ginger, and we try to grow Jamaican ginger in conjunction with some stakeholders, the Scientific Research Council and the Jamaica Business Fund. We had mixed results. Why? There's a rhizome rot that affects Jamaican ginger, and it's been affecting Jamaican ginger for many, many, many years, decades in fact. And we have not as a country, as scientists, the Scientific Research Council, the Ministry of Agriculture rather, come to terms with this important disease that is destroying our ginger industry. Jamaica used to be number 5 in production of ginger. I think we're down at number 28, 29 and going down. We're importing ginger. We're not exporting ginger. And this is a commodity that I think we can come together as a Caribbean people, as stakeholders, to solve this problem once and for all and to make it be an industry that generates income. But ginger is a high investment. So somebody like SEPROD or Jamaica banana producers need to get involved in solving or assisting in solving the problem where small companies like us have failed to achieve the objectives that we set out to do. We can also make mention of the fact that as a small company, we are not able to find the resources to establish the parameters that are needed to export our products. What I'm saying is this: we as a Caribbean people and need to have a Caribbean pharmacopoeia. I know that Tramil has some data, SRC might have some data, but we don't have a document that represents the pharmacopoeia of the Caribbean herbs and spices that we can say this is in place, and it gives us the opportunity to export our commodities to the world. So that is something that the academians and the people here at the university can look towards spearheading, working with people like Dr. Sylvia Mitchell, who is one of the Tramil, I see Dr. Picking over there, Dr. Delgoda, who are part of the Tramil family, to see how we can make sure that the Caribbean has its own pharmacopoeia, and so the Caribbean herbs and spices will be given some access to markets like Europe and other markets that we don't currently get into easily. I have one other interesting situation, and that relates to the environment. In our Jamaican situation, we have rainfall consistently each year. There are times when we have dry periods, but in the Rio Grande Valley, rain falls almost every day. Yes, it's one of the wettest areas of the world. And I'm saying to us that as a nation where we have a bauxite mining facility that impacts us in a negative way in terms of dust, it impacts us in a positive way in terms of us getting exports, earning foreign exchange. I don't know what the status is on the bauxite levy now, but probably it's costing us to export bauxite instead of it being a benefit to us. But we are creating some craters that I think, and I've postulated that more than one occasion, we should seek to converting these to water harvesting facilities where, in much the same way we have sustainable supplies of bauxite, we have sustainable supplies of water. And water as a commodity, I put it to you, is going to become more and more of a good commodity going forward because of the contamination that's taking place in our waterways and in our farming areas as it relates to the whole question of pesticide residues. That's something that we have to be aware of. And so, to the extent that the country, the government, the stakeholders that exist can harvest that water when it falls, and it does fall a lot at times, it gives us enough opportunity to create sustainable development for our country, because water as a commodity is also water that can be traded to the region. And the reserves, the volumes of bauxite that we take out, if we replace even an infinitesimally small amount of that with water, I'm sure that we will be able to provide some sort of a sustainable development for our country and for the region. And it will also impact our civil engineers, our geologists. It will bring all our scientists to play. If one looks at the bauxite companies, they can build a road, a mining road, in 24 hours with the equipment that they have. It's just their capability and capacity. And I think that water as a sustainable part of our national development is something that we ought to seek to bring into moving it from a dream to a reality. Then we look at health and nutrition. We, as a company, have found it possible to work with indigenous herbs, spices, and this, we think, as the world evolves into dealing more with primary health care using indigenous and traditional herbs, that this is something that the university, the stakeholders in industry can get involved in terms of adding value to our products. Instead of the former Prime Minister mentioned the fact that we have only, we're sending out raw materials, and we are supposed to be the land of wood and water. And if one recognizes that the value-added products that we can get from our herbs, our hydrosols, our tinctures, our essential oils that will fit into our spas and our health and wellness facilities that are being developed, then these opportunities, I think, are matters that the Caribbean, the university can look at and see how best we can enhance them. Can you imagine us having a moringa granola bar that's made with moringa from Jamaica, cinnamon from the Grenada, nutmeg from Grenada, and we have these coming together to produce something that is healthy and gives us health and wellness. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for giving me the time to share with you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wright. Some very interesting ideas there. I'd like to invite Mr. Mooney to make his presentation.
Morning. I wonder if you can hear me here. So I realize that I am the last presenter before lunch, which is strategically advantageous in some ways. It means that you're tired, you're hungry, you're saturated with information that you've been hearing from the rest of the panel, so I can say pretty much anything I want with complete and total impunity. But I'm hoping that I can add a little bit of value to this distinguished panel and to the discussion. So my name is Henry Mooney. I'm the new lead economist for Jamaica with the Inter-American Bank. I actually only arrived in the country a couple of months ago. So Jamaica is relatively new to me, but I have to tell you it's a fascinating place, and as an economist it's really an extraordinary opportunity to think about the problems that this country faces and how we as an institution can help the government and private sector and people of Jamaica to solve them. So I think on that basis, the the way I have chosen to approach this question of how science and technology and the private sector can partner together to help this country, I'm looking at it from a macro level. As a macroeconomist, that should be no surprise. I will say, as an economist here at Science and Technology, better? Sorry, could you not hear me before? Okay, I hope that's better. As I was saying, as an economist here at a Science and Technology conference with people of science, I feel a bit like a zebra at a horse race, right? Although I was glad to hear that Prime Minister Golding also is an economist by training, so maybe I'm not that unique. So again, I'm looking at the issue of science and technology and Jamaica from a macro level, and what I intend to do is sort of approach this as an economist, and that is to look at this as a problem, the problem that concerns us most at the IDB, which is growth, trying to present some data to try and define some of what we think are the causes of the problem, and then drive towards some recommendations and solutions, particularly as they relate to the private sector and technology. Now, first of all, for those of you who don't know the IDB, we are here we are the largest development partner in terms of financing for Latin America and the Caribbean. We operate across the region. We have 2,000 employees. We're based in Washington, D.C. We have a large office here. Without going into too much detail, we finance projects across all sectors, including infrastructure, transformation of government, technical assistance. We partner with the private sector in all sectors, from tourism to technology. So I think we have a great deal of overlap with some of the issues that you are discussing. So again, as an economist, I'm going to look at the problem that concerns us the most, which is economic performance. I mean, our objective is to help Jamaica grow faster, reduce poverty, improve living standards, and the sustainability of all of those things. So, in terms of problematique, one of the things that we spend a lot of time thinking about, as do you, is why is the economy of this country performing as it does? Jamaica is a tremendously interesting country. It has extraordinary potential, both in terms of natural resources and human resources and otherwise, but unfortunately the history of performance has been volatile and characterized by relatively low growth. And it's relative to the rest of the Caribbean and other countries at this level of development. So the question is why, and what can we do about it? So some of the issues that I've chosen to focus on here that relate to this topic are productivity, finance, and the business environment. So one striking fact that relates directly to science and technology is the history of productivity growth in Jamaica. Jamaica has underperformed all countries in the region on an average basis over relatively long periods of time when it comes to total factor productivity. Now, total factor productivity, for those of you who don't know, is really the amount by which an economy is able to increase the efficiency of output relative to the volume of inputs. And we define inputs as capital and labor. So what you see in this graph is Jamaica, in the red box, has underperformed most of the countries in the region over long periods of time. So it's been a drag on growth. Productivity, of course, total factor productivity, is something that can be increased, enhanced through technology, through innovation, through investment in education and higher skills. This is a similar representation of the same issue, and what you can see is, unfortunately, now these numbers are a little bit dated, but I can tell you that they still hold true. In fact, productivity, total factor productivity, has been decreasing over time. So it's not just an issue that was bad, it's an issue that is bad and getting worse. So again, this is the diagnostic. Another issue worth discussing is the business climate. So what is the private sector telling us through surveys about the issues that are inhibiting them from investing and growing their businesses? I have highlighted a couple of here. All of them are relevant to technology, but some that I think are worth highlighting. Electricity, for example. The costs of electricity in Jamaica are very high. The means of production are dated. The volume of electricity is relatively limited, so that's one area. Other issues like property rights, registering property. This registering a property is one facet of it, but we talked about intellectual property as well for innovation, for example. Getting credit is one issue. Access to finance, so the ability to finance innovation. These are issues that are a constraint for Jamaica. And then paying taxes, which relates to the macroeconomic environment and the government, and I'll get back to that. This is a similar set of issues that have been flagged by businesses in terms of where they see problems for growth. Includes things like telecommunications, transportation, business licensing and permits, education, which is clearly relevant to UE and to the sciences, costs of finance, and electricity again. So just all that to say, these are some of the critical issues that come directly from the mouths of business operators and those who are participating in the economy. Finally, as I mentioned, access to finance. Now, this is a bit complicated, forgive me, but what it shows here is Jamaica in this red box in terms of domestic credit to GDP. Despite being a middle-income country, so this, on the X scale this way, ahead of many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, elsewhere, the amount of private financing in this country relative to others at this level of development is very, very low. So again, points to the fact that there are issues constraining the ability of private sector to invest. So these are some of the problems. There are others, but some of the issues that need to be dealt with in order to help Jamaica grow faster. How does this relate to the IDB? Well, the IDB is operating based on this country strategy, and we are looking at things like access to finance, partnering with not only academia but the private sector for electricity generation. We mentioned agricultural productivity, so including irrigation, fertilizers, trying to rationalize that sector, business innovation and trying to improve the climate. Public sector is one area where we are very involved in trying to make sure that the public sector is more efficient, so taxing less, is borrowing less, has fewer employees and a lower wage bill and delivering better services. So because I'm under a time constraint, I'm going to skip over some of the issues that the IDB is working on, but I think it's important to highlight that that is something that we are doing very aggressively, so working with the public sector to make the public sector more efficient. But I think that the open door is for the academic community like yourselves to work with the private sector on the other issues, so things like productivity, so using technology to enhance processes here. I'm going to skip over a lot of our activities. One thing I would like to point out is the National Identification System. I don't know if you've heard about it, the NIDS, which is a way that we are going to leverage technology for unique personal identifiers for every Jamaican to help improve services, to help improve tracking of people so that we can make sure that funds are used efficiently in the public sector. Oh. Something happened. So let me move right to the end then. I defined some of the key issues that I think are important, and I hope you can remember the issue of productivity and the issue of access to finance. And the issue of electricity. So I was asked to point out 3 areas where we think the private sector can partner very effectively with the academic community. And here are 3 thoughts. Productivity, again, advanced skills to make sure that you have a very highly educated workforce, both scientists and otherwise, that can help your businesses grow and become more technologically efficient. Research partnerships in this area for total factor productivity or productivity. So this can include things like engineering, robotics, to help improve processes, but also in the agri-technology business, which spans everything from irrigation to biotechnology to fertilizers, et cetera, et cetera. Financing, again, access to finance is a huge constraint in this country. Now this is an area where technology, perhaps business technology, your business school, your economics department, your marketing, where there are all sorts of ways that this institution and others like it can partner with the private sector to help increase access to finance. And from the science side, that includes things like mobile technology. For example, mobile banking has become a very important means of increasing finance and access to finance in places like Africa. And these are areas where the engineering and science departments can certainly help. Innovative financing, as I said. This is your business department, can help the banks come up with innovative financing mechanisms and other ways to help channel resources into the private sector. Finally, electricity generation, storage, and transmission, making sure that as Jamaica invests more in increasing its generation and storage capacity, it leverages the newest technologies like solar energy, which has been discussed earlier, wind energy, hydro energy of different sorts. So using the newest technologies to make sure that there's more, more efficient and less cost power available to your private sector, but also, as was mentioned before, making sure that it's sustainable. Because at the end of the day, one of the other things I have learned about this country is that your greatest natural resource beyond your people and your culture is your environment. I mean, that trade, tourism, and travel is one of the key sectors for this economy. Making sure that it remains pristine and sustainable is going to be very important, and this is an area where this institution and others like it can help support environmentally clean power generation, among other things. So, given that I am out of time, I hope that this was a useful alternative perspective from the perspective of an economist, not a scientist, although we're social scientists. But I think that there is a lot of scope for this institution and others like it to help the private sector and public sector improve the growth potential of this country. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. I'm sure you'll agree that we have gotten more than a mouthful to chew on over the past 50 minutes. I will actually open the floor for questions, but I would like to perhaps put a little perspective on what we've heard and maybe take Chairman's privilege to put a question to the panel first before I do that. In the meanwhile, is there a roving microphone? Okay. So, one of the things that certainly struck me, if you saw me busy shuffling between taking notes and managing the time signals, is because there's so much coming at me. I think it's agreed, the panel said, yeah, this is desirable, and most of them said it's doable. There's an interesting disconnect between expectations of how science gets done and how it turns or translates into something that actually impacts a company. And to me, that represents a lack of knowledge of how that works on all sides. From the industry side, there's a sort of expectation that if I come to the university with a problem that I could solve, I could get the solution next week or maybe next month if I'm patient. And what we heard from Prof. Sim is that the basic research that was happening took 20 years. And then the development of the product took another four years maybe. And then it became useful. And one of those products was only useful for 2 years or something like that. And so there is, in fact, a lot of misunderstanding, I think, from many of us. It's not just on the industry side. Even from, if you speak to us as the knowledge providers, the engineers, the scientists in the faculty, and you ask us how you get one of those ideas to have an impact on your companies, most of us wouldn't be able to articulate that very well. So, I put it to you, from your own perspectives, what would you recommend that we would do to get that, perhaps, that ball rolling? How do we get that public education started so that we can, A, better educate the persons in the private sector to understand what it means to engage with the university on research matters, and B, on our side, what from your perspective you see we could do to enable you to see better what we are about and to better understand that process of that knowledge transfer. I have my own ideas, but I would certainly welcome. I think from each of you, you have an interesting perspective, because for example, from Mr. Mooney, I suspect you can give us a view from what happens in other countries, how that happens, what the standard model might be, or how that might have been have had a measurable impact on a macroeconomic scale. And certainly from Prof. Sim, from your internal view as a scientist, far removed from the commercialization process, the fact that there's a champion, the fact that there were things in place in your university that enabled that to happen, so you didn't have to worry about that too much. And certainly from our private sector representatives, what you think would be feasible in our context, how that might work. Anyone, whoever wants to start, please.
Thanks very much. The one aspect I'd like to mention was the initial contacts between the researchers and someone who would help them to commercialize in some way their product. My main interest in commercializing anything is to get more research money, but, well, it might be for other reasons, for personal money. But certainly, one thing that was very useful to us was to encounter individuals who are very good at selling things. Starting at the bottom end of the scale, if you want to sell some reagents or sell some materials, something like that, to get the ball rolling to see if you can generate some money, there are many individuals and small companies which buy up reagents from sciences. Some of the big famous companies like the Aldrich Chemical Company started off in this way. Alfred Bader, after the Second World War, realized that there were many chemistry departments in Europe which were in ruins, had no money, but they had lots of reagents which they had made. So he collected these together and made a catalogue and gave the sellers 50% of the selling price. And he built this up into a huge business, which then merged with Sigma. In the UK, for example, there are several small companies and entrepreneurs who are very good, who know the market, who know who want to buy certain things, and are looking around for someone who has them available. There's companies like Kerafast, for example, which is currently expanding, which is, I don't know in which country it's based, in fact, but they have recently, they are still working. They take up many laboratory reagents, this sort of material. The area in which it is particularly easy to sell things, for example, is antibodies. But if this is not a major activity on this campus, I don't think, but there are many other opportunities to look around for this type of thing. The other thing which made a big difference in Oxford was the development of the intellectual property services of the university. Professor Edithson mentioned this, I think, the other day. There is a company which is associated with Oxford University, which is, is a direct sub-branch of Oxford University, which is called Oxford Innovation, if I remember correctly. They have been running for quite a long time, for about 20 years, and their job was to hire people who were good at patenting and licensing, who knew the rules, who knew the legal concerns. This was quite slow to get off the ground because these people, they needed to get the experience to look around to see who was wanting to buy anything, to get into negotiation with the big pharmaceutical companies, big food companies, engineering companies, etc. So it was rather slow to get off the ground, and this organization, Oxford Innovation, did not have a very good reputation either among the scientists or the end users for some time. But now they've built up, after 15, 20 years, into a very, very useful organization which is responsible for the licensing of many things. And in the UK, many individual universities have their own licensing organization with varying reputations of how effective they are. But for the researcher, they're enormously helpful because they take away this aspect, something in which the researcher is not expert.
Just this on, yeah. As mentioned, I think from the economic perspective, and sort of the experience of other countries, two of the ingredients of successful innovation economies that we have seen are, one, property rights, intellectual property rights. So countries that have been able to make sure that those, everything from patents to, legal challenges related to patents, international treaties that protect the sanctity of intellectual property, that's a key driver. And then the second issue, as I mentioned before, is access to finance. So financing mechanisms, deep capital markets, and as mentioned before, venture capitalists, incubators, the kinds of environments that are good for innovation and the development of new technologies and investment in research and development. So I think, property rights, which is a precursor for capital markets, and financing mechanisms are two issues that have worked very well in successful economies that have innovated.
I think we should recognize that some useful effort has been made by the university to establish critical linkages with the private sector. But I think a lot more oxygen needs to be pumped into it. That there are private sector operators out there who are faced with challenges for which the university could probably provide solutions. But the university doesn't know what those problems are, and the people who are having the problems don't know what the university capability is. And therefore, I believe a strategic initiative needs to be mounted to at least create some forum somewhere where they can come together. Maybe one of the things that the university should be having, is in addition to occasions like this, is to bring the private sector people in, from agriculture, from industry, and so on. Let them sit down, let the university talk with them, let the university explain to them what it's capable of doing. Let them say, no, look, we need help in these particular areas, and to see to what extent those two can meet. But it requires effort. It has to be. It's not going to happen organically. It has to be an initiative that is strategically pursued, and it's something that I would commend to you.
From my side, I think that for us to go forward as a country, I think we have to forget individualism and work together as a team. So, for example, I'm not sure if this is already being done, but like persons who are graduating, your degree should not just be training and research, but some part of your degree should be afforded to, should I say, integration into society. So, yes, I'm doing a research on, I'm going to say proteins. Yes, so I've done the research, I've come with this, but how is it, how can we use it? How can it be effective? How can we use it in society to better economy? So at the end of the day, it's not just, yes, I did it scientifically sound. Your research should also have a, I'm going to use the term marketable part to it, but that would be from the part of the university. Now, how do you know that the marketable part of it is accurate? That is where industry comes in, because now if when you are presenting, you can't hear me, if when you're presenting your research, persons from the industry are a part of that presentation, then they can say, yes, I agree, no, I don't agree, etc. So for me, it is integration. Don't just do it because you have to do a paper. Do it because at the end of the day, it is something that can be applied to better economy.
I'll open the floor now.
Morning, Nikisha Stevenson, a lecturer in chemistry. So I agree that I'm all for strategic partnership with the business and the university. But coming off, your last point about the research that we do has to be marketable. One of the points of science, from my perspective, from a scientist, is that you start off with a curiosity, and from that curiosity you address the problem that you see and that you're passionate about, and you work on it. And you might work 20, 30 years on this one problem. The marketability for a lot of what we do, even for the technology that we enjoy today, is not necessarily apparent. And we can see that with when When we discovered penicillin, no one was looking for an antibiotic. We're just interested in seeing how these blooms were growing in these dishes, and someone realized that, hey, this can actually be used for an antibiotic purposes, and that's happened 30 years after the initial discovery. So if we are constantly looking for ways in which everything can be marketable, right, we stand the risk of losing that innovative thing and that creativity and finding something that's new, because the industries that we have now, 10, 20 years from now, they may not be here anymore. And if we're going to create new industries and new pathways, then we also have to have knowledge at the university level, and we have to respect knowledge and not necessarily is not necessarily applied, right? And that's the one thing, that's my one comment. Like, it's good to have these partnerships, but if everything that we're going to do, from creating a peptide that definitely does have some marketability once it's published, then you might lose something, right? There has to be a space where science can be done just for the sake of curiosity, and then years from now someone might find some use for that can actually take us to where we want to go or build a bigger industry from it.
Was there a question on that? Was a comment? Okay.
One has to understand the different responsibilities of a university. A university is not entirely to satisfy the market. The university has to focus on things that perhaps will have no relevance to the market until 40 years' time, if ever. But there is not an inherent contradiction between innovation and marketability. One of the big things that science needs to do is to find ways to do new things and to find ways to do old things better, which may very well have strong market attraction. So I know the university has to wrestle between its academic objectives and also its relevance in terms of market. That's a balancing act, but I don't know that it is straight across the board a conflict that can be managed.
Good morning. I'm Stanley Smelly, graduate student in the Institute for Sustainable Development. I'm also an employee here at UWI. Really interested by the panelists and the various discussions that went on. But I'm just wondering, here in the Faculty of Science and Technology, all this research going on and these breakthroughs are being made, and we recognize that we need markets, we need private investors, we need private sector in order to help to commercialize these breakthroughs, so to speak. But I'm just wondering though, in your experience or experiences, to what extent have government policies, or to what extent have you found government policies to have been essential or, you know, important in making these breakthroughs get to a point where you can achieve or create a thriving market to facilitate these breakthroughs? In other words, have government played a role in making these breakthroughs relevant for the time, hence even spurring further innovations, because persons tend to respond to what might be likely to happen after putting in all that sweat and that hard work?
Why do I get the impression you were looking at me? Government certainly has a role. As you know, in terms of how government has evolved, the thinking has been that government needs to retreat to assume more enabling regulatory role. But it still has a critical role to play in facilitating this integration between science and innovation and the real economy out there. We're certainly not doing anywhere near as much as we should be doing. Yeah, just think in terms of investment in research, and government is an important, a key actor in that. We're currently investing, the last time I looked at the numbers, I think it's about 1/3 of 1% of our gross domestic product in terms of research and development. The global average is 2.1 or 2.2%, so we're way behind. That, of course, speaks to our own fiscal challenges and so on. Can the government do more to facilitate private investment in research? Yes, I think so. But then that runs into collision with the economic realities that we have. We've had to scale back on tax concessions, which would be important in that. Government needs to be an enabler. Government needs to make more effective use of the resources that it has. One of the things that I had wanted to do when I was in office, and I didn't get a chance to do it, was to lift up the Scientific Research Council, which operates as a satellite, and to plant it right in the university and say, this is where you belong. Integrate the work that you are doing with the work of the university here so that we can get the best of the limited resources that we have. So more needs to be done. We're not going to see any big change in that until government's resource capability improves. But I take the point that you make, that the government can't sit on the sidelines on this.
Thank you. Certainly, as a company, JAMPRO has facilitated a lot of assisted us in our development over the years. But certainly the point raised by Prime Minister Golden as it relates to the Scientific Research Council, it's something I'd wanted to speak about, because I think that what's really happening in Jamaica is that everybody operates in silos. And once we are operating in silos, then there's no cross communication taking place. I am doing my research. I have a HPLC, and I need something for it. Rupika has one, David has one, but none of the three of them are working because each one needs a part. If all three of them are in one location, then we might have two HPLCs working. So I think what came out of our recent workshop with the South Africans when we were at Eden Gardens recently is that they know where all the HPLCs are, and they are in one location. All the UV, IR, gas chromatographers are in another location, and they have 20 of them, and we can go and get things done in an organized manner instead of having everybody in their own silo with all these fancy equipment, and we can't get testing done. If I want to get something like pesticide residue testing done, which I'll have to do in the near future to move my products into Europe and wherever, it's costing me an arm and a leg to do it. It's not readily available. And these are issues that the government will have to take control of and bring into the mainstream of our discussion, how we deal with those things.
Okay, so I went to an undergraduate institution in the US, and they had teamed up with industry, that the universities teamed up with industry by, they had a program where they selected undergraduate students in the summer, and the industry would tell them what problems they wanted to solve, and they'll pay the undergraduate students in the summer to work on these problems. And this program was actually quite successful. So I don't know if the university has actually thought about approaching this issue this way, but I think that's one way to go about doing it. It has been pretty successful.
So there's the one on the panel from the university, and that sounded like you're directing it to the university, but I'm going to put somebody who can speak to that.
Ken Magnus and Tony Greenaway implemented something like that about 40 years ago. SEPROD certainly has taken summer students most years as internships over the summer period, and the students would get marked on it. The staff would go out and do visits and see how the projects were going to put some grading on it and talk with people as to what the projects were. So I mean, 30 students a year invariably have been involved in that sort of thing from chemistry department anyway.
Right. In our faculty, certainly during the time that I've been dean, I mean, Robert talked about chemistry. Every department now has internships with industry. Two challenges. One is it would be desirable for every undergraduate to do an internship because we'd like everyone to leave here and be work ready. Here's where the challenge is. Industry would need to absorb all of them. So we would need to have forge a stronger relationship with industry with regard to that. But there is one other challenge, and we've seen it in chemistry because I was involved a little bit in that program. We have students with different capabilities, different abilities, and when you send a student who is, let me use the term less abled, to industry, the response that you get from the company is, and I'm going to use their word, because I wouldn't use this word for a student. They will say to us, if you send me another dud next year, I'm not going to be part of the program anymore. And so we have to find some way of giving the student and the company the best possible experience, and we're still working through that. One thing computing has said to me is they actually, for their internships, they have industry come in and interview the students. And so that way, the company can't come back to us and say, that you didn't give us the one we needed. So, but as I said, what we need is an even greater partnership with industry. Industry could provide more, but we have to do what we can on our side to make sure that when the students come to you that they are better prepared and they perform at least to the best of their ability.
Thank you very much, Dean. I think we can take away from that intervention, though, that apart from internships being what they are as we understand them, certainly targeted internships, I think that's kind of what I was hearing, targeted at problems that are real or specific to the company that they're working with, as opposed to simply coming to spend some time to get mentorship. And that's an interesting idea, and I think certainly if industry partners were interested in doing that, there are some logistic issues in there, but certainly from a high-level standpoint, it could have an impact. I'd like to put what I'm told that we have about 10 minutes more. I thought we had to wrap up, so we do have time for more questions. But a question has arisen that I'd like to take Chairman's privilege to pose, and that has to do with this part of the role of government, and in the context of the legal framework within which interactions that technology transfer normally would take place through need to be enforceable, need to be supported, need to act quickly. And right now, although contract law is well established, if you have a technical problem, if you believe that your confidence has been breached, if you believe that you might want to sue on the basis of a patent infringement, God help you get any resolution to that before the commercial life in that intellectual property has expired. And part of that problem has to do with the speed of our legal system, and B, the pervasiveness or lack thereof of the legal teams, the judges, the lawyers who are qualified or understand the issues to be able to prosecute or defend or judge them. So that's certainly not something a university can solve by itself, but maybe we have a role to play. How do we go about helping to do that? Perhaps I'll put this on to you, Mr. Golding, perhaps you're best placed to help us. How do we strategically make that happen, or make that happen faster than perhaps it would if we didn't try?
It's a very interesting point that you have raised. That I don't know whether or not this is a matter that has been put before the government, but I certainly think you ought to. I would feel it's something that Andrew Wheatley, who is Minister of Science and Technology, would be anxious to embrace. I mean, he's a UWI man himself, so it's something that I think really ought to be pursued.
More questions?
Good morning. Biochemistry MPhil student at Natural Products Institute. I have a short comment and then a question. How can we, I've noticed that we have lots of high school students, rather than go into research intensive areas, they tend to go into areas such as medicine, law, and so on. There's been a shift, I think, in going into research-oriented areas and going into areas I mentioned before. And I noticed that part of your title was about dream. So I really wanted to hear your comment as to how we can get those students to, again, once dream big so that they can see avenues of exploring these once they come to university. And so you have problems in industry regarding several different areas. Students in high school have many ideas and so on. So how do you get them to translate and to keep those dreams alive once they apply to university where they can actually solve those problems? And my other question is about productivity. How does, you mention productivity, and normally it's spoken of in a macro environment. And we have been reduced, even with the advance of technology, there has been a downward shift in productivity. How do you account for that, and how do you then translate that into academia? How can we, in academia and research area, address this problem as scientists, research scientists?
Okay, it was a very long question, so, and I think I'm going to answer part A. And part A for me is you're asking us, how do we help in encouraging high school students to want to go into research at UA and not choose medicine or law? That's the question you're asking, right? Okay. Again, sorry, as I said before, marketing is a hell of a thing. If you want to get a teenager engaged, you have to find a way to sell it. And I'm not sure it's the role of the industry to do that. I am, and this is my personal opinion. I think though it is, so basically one person come in and you want this, so I want research in chemistry to look at to somebody who's coming to university. So the thing I would want to say is that, okay, fine, so it's the day when persons are coming to register, probably a week before persons are coming to register. How does the chemistry department sell itself? Is it that, okay, you come and you get a degree, you get a paper? Is it that there is a way here for you to basically become, I'm going to use the word, become famous? Is there a way for you to become recognized? Is it, so again, it comes back to, we have to move away, as I say, from just basically being a teaching institution and a researching institution, to basically make ourselves attractive to somebody who wants to come in. I think that's the only way, and that is, as I said, my opinion.
I think part of the problem is that you mentioned high school students. And that's not where the process ought to start, in my humble opinion. Because one of the issues with our human resources, which we don't necessarily treat with, is that our basic schools are under-resourced. And if you don't get it right at the base, it's garbage in, garbage out.
Maybe I can just make a quick comment. I mean, I think part of your question, as an economist, gets to the idea of returns, right? So, people tend to gravitate towards disciplines that they think have the highest return in terms of future income potential, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, that's one of the issues probably in this environment, in this economy. The opportunities may be in areas like services, law, business, banking, that are more obvious to an entering student than they would be in the science and technology areas. So that part of that is an issue of what the market looks like, and that can only change over long periods of time. But the other issue in terms of, is attractiveness of the faculty as well. I've studied I'm Canadian, but I've studied in Canada and the US and the UK and elsewhere. And there are various successful models of academic institutions that have partnered with the public sector, again, because they are able to sort of generate the kind of research that's commercially viable. But those funds, the successes that they have in terms of innovation, then fund the department, the resources of the department, the faculty, and all of the other research that doesn't generate financial. So I think that there are, those are the 2 or 3 issues from, the economic realities of innovation and where resources flow that are constraints to what you're talking about.
I just want to add actually to that there's an interesting issue that if you talk to our undergrads now and you ask them what are their prospects for applying the things that they're learning in science and technology for when they go to work, their view of what the industry is doing is very dim. It isn't that they're innovating. It isn't that they're going to be able to take this research skills and the knowledge and so on and advance them in industries. And that's part of the lack of that connection. And so, in fact, yeah, we have work to do, but some work needs to be done in the private sector as well. And I think the point of having that nexus, that conversation going on, is probably going to help solve some of those problems. Yeah, I'm just gonna allow Mr. David Martin from Jamaica Producers to just say a few words, and then we're gonna have time for one last question afterwards. Okay, it sounds like there are gonna be 2 really burning questions, but okay, if you can just make it short because we have to wrap up.
I mean, my comments are consistent with the conversation that's been happening. So, as a private sector player, what's exciting about now is that the access to capital is far better than it has ever been. Access to market is getting better and better, especially with what's happening in logistics for Jamaica. And really a critical ingredient is just skilled labor. Now, if you ask me, what am I looking for from people? I mean, and I'm talking about university graduates. I need to see passion, critical thinking, and creativity. And a lot of people that I've hired in recent times lack passion, they lack critical thinking, and they lack creativity. So there's something missing in what we're doing here at the university. If you ask me, what are the future needs that we need to see from graduates? Robotics. I mean, if you have a repetitive task that costs more than $8,000 a year to do, you use a robot now. It's as simple as that. We need applied 3D printing is new technology that we can use. Ability to troubleshoot controls or to write control algorithms that's where the action is. And if we can get graduates with those skills, the capital is available with the access to the market that we have, we can build some fantastic businesses right here in Jamaica.
I have some graduates I'd like to introduce you to.
My name is Mohammed Halini. I'm from the University of Nottingham. I think now, we are really obsessed about, applied science. I think, and this is actually changing the scientists' attitude, the way they try to get funding, and the way they try to manipulate the system in order to get funding. Because if we take the UK and you write a proposal, unless now you show that your project is applied, it's very, very hard to get it funded. And that's we have to write 2 pages called Pathway to Impact. And there was a very good program on radio, I think it was on BBC, saying save the scientists, science from the scientists. Because to write those 2 pages, you make a dream. And that sometimes you really, I wouldn't say you say lies, but you really say things probably would never happen, because you have to write those 2 pages, show how your research is going to impact society. I think scientists need really, as the lady said, they have to have a free hand rather than doing research on their back. So all this applied, there's many discoveries, few made it actually to industry or applied. You say, because there are many issues, and one of the issues is cost. You can really get the best, I would say, the lasers, if it's high cost, you will never sell it. You say. So what I'm saying is, I don't think, focusing on a project was going to be really applied. I think let the scientists decide what they think is going to, let them actually, because science is part of the fun, to do things and discover things. You never know if it's going to be applied. I know one of my colleagues, he never went to university. He's Professor Mesfield, he passed away. He did some research on magnetism, on MRI imaging in 1960s. He never thought his research would lead to anything. But of course, the hospital now has got MRI scanners everywhere. So it took 40 years before he got his Nobel Prize. So what I'm saying, let the scientists do the fundamental science. Of course, let us work at university or other mechanisms to help them to see how they can really commercialize those ideas. Physicists are really bad at commercializing anything. You say they're good at doing research, write good papers, file them, and go on. I come from an engineering background and moved to physics. It's like changing from Islam to Christianity. You say they have got different attitudes because they are mainly interested in publishing, not at commercializing things. So the idea of having spin-off companies and so on is not in their bloodstream. So what I'm saying, let the scientists do, and then don't let the politician tell them, look, of course I understand, it's public money, you have to justify it, but science is practically, it's a curiosity, and you want to find things, and some need to commercialize, some don't.
Okay, just to... Okay, right. Just to acknowledge what you have said, please don't leave with us saying that, because I think on my slide I stated it. Scientists have to do what they do best, which is research and develop, but don't get caught in believing that that is where it ends. I am saying that instead of making the job be just about the scientist, involve the other persons in the universities. You have research, you have marketers, you have communicators, you have business persons. So the scientists can continue to research, but somebody in the university has to be there to say, okay, let us now use this and make it into a fit for purpose. Because without that, it's just going to be...
Excuse me. I'm gonna... Sorry, the point is taken. And I think we understand, but we need to wrap up. And in fact, the point you're making is quite valid. And the issue of that commercialization activity is actually not really is not in tension with good science. And really the issue is, how do we set up an infrastructure that makes the right balances drop out as a consequence of the system being right? And so it's not a debate about whether we should be doing basic science or applied science. We need to be doing all of it. And if in fact we're going to have a translation into having an impact in industry, we need to have this nexus going on properly with our industry partners. It's been a very vibrant and participatory participatory session. Thank you very much, all of you, for participating. Thanks very much to our panel. I hope that we can take away from this a few things. University needs a technology licensing office and a technology licensing regime that works well. We need to have regular meetings with our industry partners. We need to create some kind of nexus or some kind of forum that we do this all the time, not just once every 2 years when we have such a conference. Certainly, some good ideas came out, problem-focused internships with merit internships that make sure that we have good matches between who goes where, that we focus on making sure students come out with creativity and passion and, and critical thinking. Well, some of us would like to believe that we're trying to do that already, and we're happy to send them to you for that test. And I think we also learned that we need to lobby. If we see a problem with the legal framework, which I believe there is, and I can make the case, we're going to need to find some help within the government sector to help us do that. And hopefully, one of the things that has come out, certainly from the background of our scientists and even our economists as well, is that this commercialization of science doesn't happen overnight. It's not a magic bullet. There's some basic research that goes on in the background. There's some actors who come in, see the potential, and turn that into some kind of commercial opportunity. And that's the technology licensing role that is being defined here. And we don't have enough focus on that. Both sides don't know enough about that. We need to find a way to educate all of ourselves about that. So I hope I've summarized what has happened here. Thank you very, very much. Please join me in thanking the panel. Announcement? I'm asked to remind you as you break for lunch not to disappear after lunch, but to return for the Grand Innovation Challenge. That's going to start at 2 p.m. Is that a contest? Yes. All right.
It's the finals of the Grand Innovation Challenge, and we have 4 finalists. They're competing for a cash prize funded by the IDB. And also a reminder that posters 41 through 56 will be judged during lunchtime.